My belief is that Stephen King is one of these writers who has stayed close to his roots and who has sympathy and empathy and understanding and encouragement for writers everywhere. Hello and welcome back to Stephen King's Danse Macabre, a deep dive into horror literature. This is episode 2. Last week we didn't get much further than the epigraph and the reviews that newspapers and magazines left for Mr. King. I'm going to start today with, we're going to go past all the publishing stuff. That's not terribly, well, no. Nope, I'm going to have to read this one too. If we're going to do every page, let's do every page. This is the dedication page written by King, and this is what he has to say about Danse Macabre. It's easy enough, perhaps too easy, to memorialize the dead. This book is for 6 great writers of the macabre who are still alive. Let's take a break here to remember that this was published in 1981. Here are his living writers that he would like to thank. Robert Bloch, Jorge Luis Borges, pardon me, Ray Bradbury, Frank Belknap Long, Donald Wandre, and Manly Wade Wellman. Enter, stranger, at your risk. Here there be tigers. Which is pretty cool. I like that. I've stories to tell you perhaps someday about Ray Bradbury. I never got a chance to meet Ray Bradbury, but I did meet someone who knew him very well, and we tried to kind of work out some kind of meeting out in California. It never happened, which was too bad. I would have really appreciated the opportunity to sit down with Ray Bradbury and not only thank him, of course, for all of his incredible storytelling, but specifically for stories like Fahrenheit 451, which I had the honor and privilege of performing in not only once, but twice, once as Fire Chief Beatty and once as Guy Montag, and also directing the version where I played Guy Montag. That's a long story for another time, but it was a fun show to do, and just one of my favorite plays, actually. And then there were other stories like Usher 2 from the Martian Chronicles, which I performed as a show many, many years ago. That was really fun. That was probably one of the first Bradbury stories I ever read. I was familiar with Usher, and then to read Usher 2 was quite the experience. So moving on through Danse Macabre here, we have a couple of quotes. The first one is from Peter Straub in Ghost Story, which I have. I can see it from where I'm sitting, and I've never finished reading it. I started reading it and for some reason put it down and moved on to something else on accident. It wasn't because I didn't like the story. I just got distracted, so I should go back and reread that. Anyway, this is from Peter Straub's Ghost Story. What's the worst thing you've ever done? I won't tell you that, but I'll tell you the worst thing that ever happened to me, the most dreadful thing. And then we have, I believe this is a song lyric from Eddie Cochran, Come On Everybody. And King quotes Eddie Cochran as saying, well, we'll really have a party, but we gotta post a guard outside. Interesting. I've noticed if you haven't been, for some reason, reading King, I don't know if he still does it much anymore, but back in the day, he was very fond of quoting from like AC/DC lyrics and things like that. And when I say fond of, I may mean only once. It just happens to be a book that I've read multiple times, so I don't know if he actually did it multiple times. But it was something that I noticed, and Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive, which he directed, is in fact probably the single reason I became a fan of hard rock and heavy metal back in like 7th or 8th grade. The soundtrack to Maximum Overdrive was phenomenal. AC/DC, the album was Who Made Who, and I used that music for my own film that I was making when I was 13 years old. Sadly enough, never released in Hollywood, but that was just a great album, still one of my favorites, and I have Stephen King to thank for that. So, little sidebar there. So then we have the contents. We're going to skip the contents and go into what he dubs the forenote, which I don't know if I've encountered that term before, forenote, but here we go. Let's see what he has to say. We're actually into the book now, so that's good. And we probably are not going to get past the first paragraph today, though I will give it a try. Here's the first paragraph. This book in your hands as the result, okay, one more time. Fix it in post. This book is in your hands as the result of a telephone call made to me in November of 1978. So this would be 4 years after he published Carrie. I was at the time teaching creative writing and a couple of literature courses at the University of Maine at Orono? Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that. And working whenever spare time I could find on the final draft of a novel, Firestarter, which will have been published by now. The call was from Bill Thompson, who had edited my first 5 books, Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, Night Shift, and The Stand, in the years 1974 to 1978. More important than that, Bill Thompson, then an editor at Doubleday, was the first person connected with the New York publishing establishment to read my earlier unpublished work with sympathetic interest. He was that all-important first contact that new writers wait and wish for and so seldom find. We could spend all day just on that paragraph. Where to start? Let's start with that list of first 5 books. I think, I've published 9 novels so far. Some of them to acclaim, some of them to dead silence. Just depends. Frankly, some of the ones that were published to dead silence I think are my best work, so go make of that what you will. But imagine a career that only spanned Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, Night Shift, and The Stand. Like, that is a hell of a career. Just those 5 books. I would give up everything I had just to have those 5 books, you know what I'm saying? Of them, though, Night Shift and Salem's Lot really stick out for me. Salem's Lot is phenomenal. The original television movie is, to me, still retains its horror. If you haven't seen it, if you were too young to have seen it, perhaps, which is the most likely case, those of you who are old enough and saw it for the first time on television or saw it not long after, perhaps on the VHS rental that you got from Blockbuster or the local video store, will remember the Glick boy scratching the window. That is still fucking horrifying. I don't know if it's horrifying from nostalgia or if just taken by itself it is still horrifying, but man, it was terrifying back in the day. I, for some reason, have a very clear memory of seeing that scene in a hotel room in Tucson with my parents. I don't know why I know that it was Tucson. I don't know what we were doing there. Statistically, it was either for my dad's work, which seems unlikely, or like some kind of tennis tournament perhaps, because my parents were both big tennis players. But I honestly don't know. I just remember being like, God, 5 or 6, maybe 7 on the outside, and seeing this movie on television. Holy shit. Scary, scary movie. I've recently become even more enamored of the novel, which I have both read and listened to. I also really like, if you didn't know this, Salem's Lot is part of a sort of trilogy. King has 2 additional stories that are attached to Salem's Lot. Those are One for the Road and Jerusalem's Lot. I love both of those stories. Night Shift, which is a short story collection, the one that came before Skeleton Crew, which is probably the first one that I read. I probably read Night Shift before I read Skeleton Crew, but both Jerusalem's Lot and One for the Road are in the collection of Night Shift. And I remember being very young, 10, 11 years old, and really, really enjoying One for the Road. My mom got me audio cassettes, books on tape. This was, ages and ages before books on tape or audiobooks were as big as they are now. And I still have recordings of them. I kept them for years and then finally transferred them over to digital because the tapes were getting worn out after decades of use. But Colin Fox. Oh my gosh, I just remembered his name. The narrator for One for the Road was an actor named Colin Fox, and he narrated that story so very well. That's a great one to listen to in the dark. So if you can find Stephen King's One for the Road, narrated by Colin Fox, you can usually find it online somewhere, and it's scary. I don't know if you know this, but Stephen King is scary. Anyhow, so yeah, Salem's Lot, big fan of Salem's Lot. Night Shift, Carrie, I like Carrie. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the movie, the original movie. It's not my favorite. It's good. I enjoyed it. It's not like in my top 5 or anything of Stephen King books. And when we're talking about Stephen King books, there's a lot you can choose from to make your top 5, right? So Night Shift, on the other hand, I think I have a copy right here, my copy, somewhere. Yep, there it is. This is, god damn, I have no idea how old this copy is, but I mean, it's yellow. It's, it's the spine is cracked multiple times. You can just see this is like not even a book that a used bookstore would probably accept in this kind of condition, which is fine because it's not going to a used bookstore. It's my goddamn copy of Night Shift, and I love it. It's almost falling apart here. What's it smell like? God, it just smells old. That's dust, and God only knows what else. There are so many wonderful stories in this book. Even the introduction is phenomenal. Most of these have been made, if not all of them, have been made into movies, either short films as part of an anthology or as full-length movies. I think the original film for Children of the Corn is also still very successful. I think that is still a very frightening movie, and the story itself is still very effective. One of the things I was going to say about that and the Salem's Lot trilogy, those two stories in particular have more recently really inspired my work. I've got a novel out on submission right now called Mr. N's Cosmic Horror Ice Cream Shop, and it is deeply influenced by the Salem's Lot trilogy as well as a little bit of Children of the Corn. So thank you, Stephen King. Which reminds me that I think one of the reasons, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I'm that generation, Gen X, who probably started writing because of Stephen King. I know I did. Seeing the movies like Creepshow 2, those left an indelible impact on me. Reading books like Night Shift and Skeleton Crew, and even The Stand, things like that. It was hard to not be influenced by him. I certainly remember, I've got my old Corona typewriter up here, Smith Corona typewriter. That's, I believe, was my mother's. So this typewriter is older than I am, which is really saying something. And that's what I first learned to type on. And one of the things I used to type was my own sort of stolen, plagiarized versions of Stephen King short stories, typically from things that you would see in Cat's Eye, for example. That was an anthology movie, or Creepshow 2, things like that. I would change the names and change a little bit of the story, but it was essentially a complete ripoff, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I wasn't turning it in to be published. It was just me having fun and really just enjoying the process of kneeling on the ground. I can still feel that awful thin striped carpet in my bedroom, kneeling on that carpet and just pounding away at those manual keys, telling my stories. Some of them I still have in my filing cabinets right now. We didn't have typing paper, so some of it is on regular loose leaf notebook paper, which doesn't take well to manual typewriters, if you didn't know. So many of them have holes in them from where the period would smash right through the paper. And it was just a joy. It was an absolute joy. Obviously, at those ages, I wasn't thinking about, I'm going to be a writer when I grow up or anything. I was just writing stories primarily for myself. Maybe I'd share them with my parents, but most of them I didn't. Some of them I might bring to school and share with students at school. But mostly, I was just enjoying the process of storytelling. And that is probably today's takeaway for myself and for you as a creator or as a writer, as an artist, however you choose to identify. Man, if you're not doing that, you're just working another job. You know what I mean? There are a million different ways to make money as a storyteller today with today's technology. Millions of ways. I don't know which one's best for you. I'm still trying to figure out which one's best for me, for that matter. But I do know this. There are all kinds of videos and articles and things you could Google right now to quote unquote make $1 million on Kindle, or how I made $3,000 this week writing articles for such and such, or whatever. The internet is sick with articles and how-tos on those topics, okay? And maybe one of them would work for you. Maybe one of them will work for me, but I'll tell you this. Some of them I have tried, and maybe some of them I could have made a lot of money doing. And if I had, you want to know what? I may as well have gone to work in somebody's cubicle. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't fun. There was no joy in it. I wasn't having a good time doing the writing or doing the work that it took to make it happen. And I would rather go shelve books again at my old library and then come back and write stories with joyfulness than because I have to do it. That's just me. That's just my take. The other thing I just wanted to touch on briefly here was at the end of the paragraph where he talks about first person in the New York publishing establishment to read my earlier unpublished work with sympathetic interest. He was that all-important first contact that new writers wait and wish for and so seldom find. This is, remember, 1981, and I hate to break it to you, my lovely apprentice writers, but it is still seldom to find. One thing that drives me absolutely batshit crazy in the writing and publishing space today is when our gurus and teachers and course builders and stuff will ask the question of you, the writer, well, should you choose independent publishing or should you choose traditional publishing? And it makes me want to scream, because the phrasing of that question makes it sound like, oh, I choose traditional publishing, and then you can just toddle on off and get yourself an agent and jump into Random House, Simon & Schuster, whoever. That's not how it works. Can you do that? Yes, I did it. You can do it. The only bar to entry is a phenomenal book that they can sell. That's it. If you've written that, and they don't already have something in their queue, or they haven't already published something like yours recently, then you've already jumped up to like the top 1%. You're already there. Okay. Now, after that, there's a million different reasons why they aren't going to sign with you, perhaps. Okay. So it's really hard, but I really want to disabuse you of this phrasing of you can choose independent or you can choose traditional. You can choose to try to go traditional, but you really need to underscore that word try. And it makes me angry because those of us who've been in the industry for not even a great length of time already know this, but there are so many of you new writers, apprentice writers, who aren't being told that piece. You're being presented this option as if it's, you can always go traditional. Well, no, you can't. There are, I mean, countless authors out there, both independently published and completely unpublished, who haven't yet and will never potentially be published traditionally. And that's okay. Totally okay. But you just need to go into this with your eyes wide open. When Stephen King back in 1981 says, and so seldom find, he's still right. It is very, very hard to get into traditional publishing. And I got to tell you, speaking from experience, the depth of your resume, the depth of how many other stories you've published, novels you've published, etc., doesn't guarantee shit. It doesn't. It might help. It might open doors. It might get you connections or connected to people that you might not have otherwise had access to or as rapidly as other people, perhaps. Maybe, but that's about it. This is something I encountered when I was writing for Spawn. In fact, when comic creators, comic creators find out that I wrote for Spawn many, many years ago, they say, oh, well, you can just go get a job writing for Spider-Man then. And I'm like, no, I can't. And other creators in the industry also kind of smile behind their hands and nod because they know exactly what I mean when I say, no, I can't. That's not how the industry works. Is it useful that I have something like that on my resume? Sure it is. Does it bang in the doors? Can I just fire off an email to the president of Marvel or DC and say, hey, I want to write Batman. Look, I wrote for Spawn. No, I can't. That's not how the industry works. I'm so sorry. But these are the things you need to know. So, as I suspected, we only got one paragraph into Stephen King's Danse Macabre. Next week, we'll go into paragraph 2. This is going to be a long series, you guys. This is going to be a very, very long series. But what I do appreciate, and we'll end with this, what I do appreciate about this paragraph, and what I do appreciate about what I have seen and read of Stephen King in the intervening decades, is that for as far removed as he may be from those of us who still toil in the trenches and the mid-listers and things like that, never mind the apprentice writers who are trying so hard to break in, despite his distant removal from those days, my belief, having not met him, my belief is that Stephen King is one of these writers who has stayed close to his roots and who has sympathy and empathy and understanding and encouragement for writers everywhere. You see it on writing. You'll see it in Danse Macabre when we get to it. I think you've seen it probably in keynotes or speeches or interviews. He still understands us and appreciates us and gets how hard this is. He is not ignorant to that. And for that, I really appreciate how he has conducted himself professionally for those of us who are toiling away. Anyway, so those are my thoughts on Danse Macabre for this week. Tune in next week when we move on to paragraph 2. Apparently, I've got things to say. I don't know. Hope this was helpful. You can find me online at tomlevine.com, or just put in Tom Levine in Google, and all kinds of different social media and websites and reviews and things like that will pop up. Just make sure that you spell my name right and everything will be fine. All right, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Keep reading and keep writing.